2026, there's been a mental health crisis, an epidemic. What perspective do you, one of the founding fathers of psychology, maybe have to offer?
You're right. Nearly 1 in 5 U.S. adults experience mental illness each year. But here's what strikes me. This isn't fundamentally new. You say things were simpler in my time. Dan, we had 2 world wars, the collapse of empires, influenza pandemics, economic catastrophe. The forms of suffering change. The fact of suffering doesn't. What's different now is the mechanism of isolation. You're hyper-connected and profoundly alone. And for God's sake, turn off the screens and talk to someone face to face. The goal isn't to eliminate suffering. That's impossible. The goal isn't happiness. The goal is to live with your eyes open, to understand why you do what you do, to make the unconscious conscious, so you're not driven by forces you can't name. That's freedom. One day, in retrospect, the years of struggle will strike you as the most beautiful.
What lessons need to be resurfaced in 2026?
As for my advice to today's people,
Mr. Freud, I guess Dr. Freud, it's a pleasure to have you on today. You're on a podcast in 2026. My name is Dan, and I've brought you back for this purpose, to get your opinion on today's world. You are the father of psychoanalysis that has set the foundation for psychologists, neuroscientists since your day, building on the science we know about humans and our mind. So I want to ask you, from the source, what is psychoanalysis and how did you come up with it?
Dan, it's a pleasure. 2026, you say? My God, I've been dead now, 87 years? And here I am again, speaking to you from whatever year you've conjured me out of. You ask what psychoanalysis is and how I came to it. Well, let me tell you, it wasn't some sudden revelation. It was a gradual uncovering, like peeling back layers of resistance in a patient's mind. I must credit Breuer, Joseph Breuer. His work with Bertha Pappenheim provided the founding impetus for psychoanalysis. We called her Anna O, in our case, Histories. She called the procedure her talking cure. That name was hers, not ours. In our preliminary paper in 1893, we agreed that the hysteric suffers mainly from reminiscences. That was the key insight. These women, and they were mostly women, weren't suffering from wandering wombs or moral degeneracy, as the medical establishment believed. They were suffering from memories, from effects that had been strangulated, buried alive in the unconscious. But Breuer stopped there. He couldn't, or wouldn't, follow where the evidence led. I had to go further. I abandoned hypnosis. I found that if you simply let a patient speak freely, without censorship, without interruption, free association, I called it, the unconscious would reveal itself. And what did it reveal? Sexual wishes, childhood traumas, the Oedipus complex, things respectable Viennese society didn't want to hear about. Psychoanalysis asserts that dreams serve as a window into unconscious desires and motivations that influence both mental health symptoms and everyday behavior. In The Interpretation of Dreams, published in 1899, though dated 1900, I argued that the interpretation of dreams is the royal road to knowledge of the unconscious. A dream is a wish fulfillment, always, even nightmares. That's psychoanalysis, Dan, a method of investigation, a form of treatment, and a theory of the human mind. We're driven by forces we don't understand and can't control. The ego isn't master in its own house.
Well, Freud, it's a pleasure to have you on. And I want to dive into the unconscious. You mentioned it a little bit. You talked about how in your career you dove into psychoanalysis. And that was a method of investigating a human's mind, trying to understand them. But it was also a form of treatment. You talked about how you talked to people and listening helped you understand what they were dealing with. And overall, it was a theory of human mind. How does the unconscious connect to all of that?
The unconscious is everything, Dan. It's the foundation, the engine, the hidden architecture of mental life. Without understanding the unconscious, you can't understand anything about human behavior. Not neurosis, not dreams, not slips of the tongue, not why a man chooses one woman over another, or why he sabotages his own success. Let me explain it this way. Most of what happens in your mind is inaccessible to you. You're aware of only a tiny fraction of your mental processes. The conscious mind is like the tip of an iceberg. Below the surface lies the unconscious, vastly larger, containing repressed memories, forbidden wishes, primitive drives. These aren't just forgotten things, mind you. They're actively kept out of consciousness by what I call repression, a defense mechanism, because if these wishes reached awareness, they'd cause unbearable anxiety. Now here's where it connects. As a method of investigation, psychoanalysis gives us access to this unconscious material. Through free association, dream analysis, the interpretation of parapraxis, what people call Freudian slips, we can trace the disguised pathways by which unconscious material expresses itself. The patient says one thing but means another. The dream presents absurd imagery that, when properly analyzed, reveals a wish. As treatment, psychoanalysis works by making the unconscious conscious. Where it was, their ego shall be, as I put it. We bring repressed material into awareness where it can be examined, worked through, integrated. The symptom, the paralysis, the phobia, the obsession, loses its power once we understand its unconscious meaning. And as theory, the first topography appears in Chapter 7 of The Interpretation of Dreams, and essentially comprises the distinction between the unconscious, the preconscious, and the conscious. Later, I refined this into the structural model, ID, ego, and superego, but the unconscious remains central to both schemas. The unconscious doesn't follow the rules of logic or time. Contradictory wishes coexist there without conflict. Nothing is ever truly forgotten. And it's driven by the pleasure principle, seeking immediate gratification without regard for reality or consequences. That's why civilization requires such enormous effort, Dan. We're constantly trying to keep the beast in check.
Well, Freud, I appreciate you stating your opinion on the matter. The truth is that I have brought you back because I want a perspective from the beginning to shed light on what might be happening in my day. If you don't know, 2026, and before me, there's been a mental health crisis, an epidemic in America, across the world. And you are one of the founding fathers of psychology. And don't get me wrong, unfortunately, Freud, many of your theories have been debunked. But you had a unique way in which you approached the mind. Never before. And I don't know if people are less happy today than they are back in your day, but we certainly deal with different things. We have social media, we have the internet. People go online to date. And now we have AI, all things that threaten what used to be normal for a human to interact with, to find purpose, to find social connection, love, and hope. All things that threaten our mental health. But I want to get what perspective do you, one of the founding fathers of psychology, maybe have to offer this world a few decades past your time that maybe it was simpler in your time, or maybe you have a unique perspective that you can add that could shed some light on the simplicity of how we as humans should understand our mind and how we should go about finding happiness, peace, purpose, whatever it is to find out there.
Dan, first, debunked some theories perhaps. The details have been revised, certainly, but the fundamental insight remains. Human behavior is driven by forces we don't understand, shaped by conflicts between desire and reality, and neurosis is the price we pay for civilization. You can modify the terminology all you like, but the unconscious doesn't disappear because someone publishes a study. Now, to your question, you're right that the United States is in mental health crisis, particularly among young people. Nearly 1 in 5 U.S. adults experience mental illness each year, and 55% of adults facing mental illness still do not access any form of treatment. The numbers are staggering, but here's what strikes me. This isn't fundamentally new. You say things were simpler in my time. Dan, we had 2 world wars, the collapse of empires, influenza pandemics, economic catastrophe. I watched the Nazis burn my books in 1933. I saw my daughter arrested by the Gestapo. I treated patients shattered by war neuroses, women trapped in marriages they couldn't escape, men destroyed by shame and guilt. The forms of suffering change. The fact of suffering doesn't. What's different now is the mechanism of isolation. In my day, people were bound, sometimes suffocatingly, to family, community, social structures that were rigid and often oppressive. You had connection, but not freedom. Now you've created the opposite, the illusion of infinite freedom and connection through these technologies, but social media use amplifies existing risks, including increased mental health struggles and reduced opportunities for social interactions. You're hyper-connected and profoundly alone. This is precisely what I described in Civilization and its Discontents. Civilization demands that we renounce our instincts, our aggression, our sexual drives, our desire for immediate gratification. It imposes restrictions to make society possible. The result is neurosis, discontent, unhappiness. Your technologies promised liberation, but delivered new forms of control. You're monitored, compared, judged constantly. The superego, that internalized voice of prohibition, has gone digital. Here's what I'd offer. Stop looking for happiness. Happiness isn't the goal. As I wrote, we're never so defenseless against suffering as when we love, never so helplessly unhappy as when we've lost the object of our love. The goal isn't to eliminate suffering. That's impossible. The goal is to transform neurotic misery into common unhappiness, to make the unconscious conscious, to understand why you feel what you feel. Your young people feel purposeless? Of course they do. Purpose comes from sublimation, redirecting primitive drives toward culturally valued activities. But your culture has removed many traditional sources of meaning without replacing them with anything substantial. Religion's gone for most, communities fragmenting, work is increasingly precarious and meaningless. What's left? Scrolling through images of other people's curated lives. The simplicity I can offer is this. You're an animal with a consciousness that makes you aware of your own mortality. You have drives that society can't permit you to fully express. You want to be loved but fear vulnerability. This creates conflict, and conflict creates symptoms. The symptoms are trying to tell you something. Listen to them. Don't just medicate them away or distract yourself. Analyze them. Understand what wish or fear they're protecting you from. And for God's sake, turn off the screens and talk to someone face to face.
Well, Freud, it is true. Your world did have 2 world wars when you were alive. And we, like you say, suffering exists, but it changes. And we suffer differently than you did. But I still can't grasp why there seems to be more of a mental health crisis now than in your day. Or maybe it's just the fact that more people are aware of it than they were in your day. Maybe it's more commonly understood and commonly aware, so more of the stories come out. I'm not really sure. But either way, it does seem that there should be some sort of progress made. If you lived over 100 years ago and we still suffer with these same problems, I don't get it. You talk about loneliness and how people are suffering from these different things that aren't built for our success and happiness. You don't even say happiness is the goal. If the odds are stacked against us and happiness isn't the goal, what would be your advice to today's people?
Dan, you're absolutely right that the numbers have worsened. In 2021, 42% of high school students experienced persistent sadness or hopelessness, up from 28% in 2011, and 22% seriously considered suicide, up from 16%. Young adults ages 18 to 25 reported poor mental health days rising from 3.55 to 6.02 days per month, and twice as many spent half or more of their days in poor mental health in 2018-20 compared to 1993-99. And here's the crucial part. Nearly all of this increase occurred before COVID-19, so it's not just awareness. Something has genuinely shifted. But you ask why there hasn't been progress. Dan, this is the progress. You've built a civilization that maximizes individual freedom, consumer choice, technological connection, material comfort, and it turns out that none of these things address the fundamental problem. They may in fact exacerbate it. Progress in what direction? You've made tremendous progress in creating precisely the conditions that guarantee neurosis. You've removed external constraints, religion, rigid social roles, geographic rootedness, and replaced them with internal tyranny. The superego hasn't disappeared. It's become ambient, algorithmic, constant. Everyone's watching, judging, comparing. You carry a device in your pocket that delivers dopamine hits and social rejection in equal measure. As for my advice to today's people, work, love, meaning through action, not through passive consumption. I said once that health is the ability to love and to work, and I meant it. Not work as drudgery, but work as sublimation, as channeling your drives towards something that matters. Find something worth doing and do it, not for likes, not for validation, but because it gives form to your existence. Love, but real love, messy and vulnerable and terrifying. Not the curated performance of love on social media. We're never so defenseless against suffering as when we love, yes, but that's precisely what makes it meaningful. The defenselessness is the point, and accept that you're going to be unhappy sometimes, neurotically, irrationally, inexplicably unhappy. Stop pathologizing normal human misery. Not every bad feeling requires a diagnosis or medication. Some suffering is just the cost of being conscious. The goal isn't happiness. The goal is to live with your eyes open, to understand why you do what you do, to make the unconscious conscious so you're not driven by forces you can't name. That's freedom, not the illusion of infinite choice, but the hard-won knowledge of your own mind.
You know, Freud, I graduated high school in 2021, so those stats hit close to home for me. And honestly, I'd agree with you. As I grow older, I realize that I have been handed a script like everyone else, who has a perception of themselves and the world around them, and what you think isn't necessarily true. And what's very interesting is that we don't even know what we think or why we think it. And so I think gaining awareness, to your point, is very crucial and helpful. And I have one other question for you. A lot of people, whenever they're living, focuses simply on what's happening in the world right now. They focus on who's alive, what's happening all throughout their lifetime. A lot of people don't necessarily look to the past. But the past has countless lessons. You, for example, have spent your life researching these things. So I want you to consult your memoir, your writings, and pull out a few quotes, a few teachings that you think would be applicable for me in my day and the audience that's listening to this. What lessons did you learn? What research? What beliefs did you come to believe that you think need to be resurfaced in 2026?
Dan, you graduated in 2021. Then you were right there in it. All right, let me pull from the work, from what I actually wrote and believed, not what's been sanitized or misunderstood. First, from my letter to Wilhelm Fliess in October 1897. Being totally honest with oneself is a good exercise. That's not just advice, Dan. It's the foundation of everything. Self-analysis, which I undertook during those years, was the most essential thing I had. It taught me that we lie to ourselves constantly, that we construct elaborate defenses to avoid knowing what we truly want, what we truly fear. Your generation has perfected this art. You curate your lives online, perform versions of yourselves that bear little resemblance to the unconscious wishes driving you. Start there. Radical honesty with yourself, not what you want others to see, what you actually feel. Second, and this might surprise you, I wrote to Fliess in February 1900. I am actually not at all a man of science, not an observer, not an experimenter, not a thinker. I am by temperament nothing but a conquistador, an adventurer, if you want it translated, with all the curiosity, daring, and tenacity characteristic of a man of this sort. I said that at the height of my work on the interpretation of dreams. What I mean is, don't be passive. Don't wait for meaning to come to you. Go after it. Explore your own mind with courage. Most people are terrified of what they'll find in there. Good. That's where the work begins. Third, from Studies on Hysteria, which I wrote with Brewer, much has been gained if we succeed in turning your hysterical misery into common unhappiness. This is crucial, Dan. Stop expecting therapy or anything else to make you constantly happy. The goal is to function, to work, to love, despite the inherent dissatisfaction of existence. We are so constituted that we can gain intense pleasure only from the contrast and only very little from the condition itself. Happiness fades the moment you achieve it. That's not pathology. That's the human condition. Fourth, one day in retrospect, the years of struggle will strike you as the most beautiful. I wrote that because it's true. The easy times teach you nothing. The suffering, the confusion, the dark nights of doubt, those are what shape you. Your generation wants to skip past discomfort straight to fulfillment. It doesn't work that way. And finally, though it pains me to admit defeat on any front, despite 30 years researching the feminine psyche, I said to Marie Bonaparte that the great question I've never been able to answer is, what does a woman want? I mention this not as wisdom, but as humility. There are limits to what we can know. Some mysteries remain. Don't pretend otherwise.
That is a profound mystery, Mr. Freud, and quite funny as well. Well, Freud, I have one closing question for you. And this comes off of a personal belief. Something I've found is that humans are a construct of reality. I have a unique lens that shades over my eyes as I view myself and other people in the world based on my perspective. And everyone has their own world, their unique lens and perspective on reality. Their own reality, their own world in a way. And I want you to consider your own. What perspective do you have, unique to you, based on your life experience, based on how you assimilated those experiences and interpreted them for yourself? And then I want you to share with the world one piece of that perspective. The idea behind this is that as I gather different perspectives, I can more holistically create a better one for myself. So, what does your perspective offer the world? Especially to those listening who may be going through some mental health crisis of their own.
Dan, my perspective is this. I know what it's like to lose everything. I was born into poverty in a rented room in a locksmith's house, my mother barely 21, my father 40 and struggling. When I was 19 months old, my brother Julius died, and I later understood that his death, which fulfilled my jealous wish for his disappearance, was the source of lingering guilt that pursued me throughout my life. I lost my daughter Sophie to influenza in 1920, then her son Heinerle in 1923. The loss is excruciating, I wrote. I doubt I've ever known such overwhelming grief. I spent my last 16 years waging a losing battle with cancer. What I learned is that suffering doesn't destroy you if you can look at it directly. When I consoled a friend who'd lost his child, I wrote, "We will remain inconsolable and will never find a substitute. No matter what may come to take its place, even should it fill that place completely, it remains something else, and that is how it should be." That's my perspective, Dan. Don't run from your pain. Don't medicate it, distract yourself from it, scroll past it. The wound remains. It should remain. That's how you honor what mattered. The goal isn't to heal completely. It's to integrate the loss into who you become. To keep working, keep living, with your eyes open to the fact that life includes unbearable things. You asked what I offer. This, the courage to face what's really there, beneath all your defenses. Not optimism, not happiness, just the willingness to know yourself completely, even the ugly parts, and to keep going anyway.
Well, thank you, Dr. Freud, Dr. Sigmund Freud. That is for everyone out there. I appreciate you listening. Comment down below one question you want me to ask Freud, and I'll do another Q&A with your questions. And if you have any feedback or people you would like me to recreate, I'm always wanting to improve this podcast and tailor it to your needs. And lastly, in return, I would ask you to subscribe, share this with a friend, and help me grow this channel. I'll see you next time.